Part 48. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 471. Wang is dead. When the company trained the killer, one of the rules was that if the killer was caught, there was only one choice: suicide. Only by death can the secret be hidden and not revealed. But Wang was wrong. The person he met now was not an ordinary person, but Chen Tao. For Chen Tao, even if Wang was dead, he could still read the information he wanted to know through the code stored in Wang's body. Chen Tao looked at Wang. In Chen Tao's eyes, Wang's whole body turned into a code composed of 1 and 0. Through these codes, Chen Tao can read Wang's memories of this life. Although Wang is dead, those memories are stored in his brain. As long as he reads the memory code that constitutes his brain, he can know all of Wang's memories. Chen Tao read it and his eyebrows stretched slightly. Wang's life is very simple. He was adopted by a company called Blackstone when he was a child, and then he was trained to be a killer. After he was 16 years old, he began his career as a killer. It has been 3 years now. In the past 3 years, Wang has killed hundreds of people. He accepts missions without asking for the purpose or reason, just killing. This is the life of Wang. Chen Tao wants to know who sent Wang, but through Wang's memory, he only knows a company called Blackstone and his boss named Scorpion. That's all. Wang doesn't even know where Blackstone is located, what power it belongs to, or what Scorpion looks like. Wang knows too little. Shockingly little. He is completely a tool in the hands of others, nothing more. This is a troublesome matter. If it were someone else, the clues would probably be cut off, and it would be difficult to find the person behind the scenes. But Chen Tao has his own way. He reached out and took the walkie-talkie off Wang. This walkie-talkie is the only channel for Wang to communicate with Scorpion. If you want to find Scorpion, you can only rely on this thing. However, Chen Tao looked at the walkie-talkie and found that it had been flooded. It's broken. What to do? This walkie-talkie is the only clue to find the mastermind. If this thing is broken, Scorpion cannot be contacted. Then, with only one clue, it is like looking for a needle in a haystack to find the person called Scorpion. You should know that Blackstone and Scorpion are probably just code names. Perhaps only Shepard knows these two code names. With Shepard's death, these two code names are probably gone. It is impossible to find them. The walkie-talkie in Chen Tao's hand glowed with blue light, and soon, the walkie-talkie was repaired. The walkie-talkie is fixed. Chen Tao said to the walkie-talkie, "The mission failed, and the target is still alive." He used the programmed voice changer to change his voice, and the voice he made was the same as Shepard's. I saw it. The voice on the other end of the walkie-talkie sounded slowly, saying, "You did a good job, and this failure is not your fault. Go first and wait for the next task." Chen Tao raised his face and looked around. Everything around him turned into blue code. The intercom needs to transmit information through signals. And now in Chen Tao's eyes, everything has become a code, including signals. He transmits through signals. Came to the source of the signal transmission just now. His figure appeared in a room. Chen Tao is now standing in a living room. And in the living room, a woman in a bathrobe, wearing a pair of red high heels, sitting on the sofa with her legs crossed. This woman is tall and proud, and looks extremely cold. She is holding a glass of red wine in her hand, and on the table in front of her is the intercom. And in front of the woman, 5 meters away, 180 degrees around, all are screens. Most of the screen images are surveillance images near the location where Marta is in danger. This woman is Scorpion. But the voice Chen Tao just heard on the intercom is a male. Obviously, this Scorpion uses a voice changer. Time resumes. As soon as Scorpion finished speaking, she shook the wine glass in her hand, and frowned as she looked at the red liquid in the glass. As if she had noticed something, she raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Their eyes met. Scorpion's eyebrows suddenly frowned, and she stretched out her hand, took out a pistol from the sofa, pointed the muzzle at Chen Tao, and pulled the trigger directly. Scorpion was only wearing a bathrobe and looked defenseless, but no one expected that she would have a pistol on the sofa. She picked up the gun and fired the gun in one go, without any hesitation, just to kill Chen Tao instantly. The bullet flew. Chen Tao stretched out his hand and caught the bullet with one hand. He opened his mouth. The bullet fell to the ground. Pop! The sound produced by the collision between the hard bullet and the floor was particularly crisp. Scorpion's cold face changed. Scorpion was still planning to pull the trigger, but his hand exerted force. Splash! The pistol in her hand turned into water, soaking her palm. Scorpion was stunned. She adjusted her mood and slowly sat back on the sofa, staring at Chen Tao. Chen Tao casually threw the intercom on the table. Scorpion looked at the intercom on the table and frowned. Chen Tao said, "Do you know why I came to see you?" Hearing this, Scorpion looked at Chen Tao, crossed her legs, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "I don't know." Chen Tao crossed his arms, looked at the charming woman in front of him, and said, "Tell me, what organization do you belong to? Why did you attack Marta?" Scorpion showed a playful smile and said, "Do you want to know? I can tell you, but you have to satisfy me with one thing." Looking at Scorpion's charming smile, his eyebrows stretched slightly and said, "What is it?" Scorpion stood up, took a cat step, walked in front of Chen Tao, gently put her hand around Chen Tao's neck, looked at Chen Tao charmingly, and said, "Your body can't be penetrated by bullets, it's so hard, I just don't know if your whole body is hard." She looked at Chen Tao, and a glimmer of murderous intent flashed in her eyes. Sometimes a woman's body can also be a weapon, and Scorpion is a woman. She has the advantages of a woman. With her appearance and her figure, no matter which man sees her, it is impossible to control himself. But she has hidden all kinds of poisons in her body. As long as the man dares to do something, she can kill him immediately. Chen Tao raised his hand, held Scorpion's hand, looked at her and said, "I see you don't want to know if my body is hard, but if my body is resistant to poison, right?" She was startled, and the smile on her face froze. Scorpion adjusted her mood, she looked at Chen Tao and said, "Yes." She smiled, "Then do you dare?" My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 472. Do you dare? Chen Tao looked at the beautiful woman in front of him. He stretched out his hand, pulled the woman away, and flicked her away. The woman was thrown onto the sofa. She still wanted to move, but found that she couldn't move, and she couldn't even open her mouth. She was confused, what was going on? Chen Tao said, "Even if you talk, I still have a way to know what I want to know." His eyes glowed blue, and in Chen Tao's sight, the woman turned into an existence composed of blue codes. By reading her memories, Chen Tao finally knew the situation. Blackstone is better said to be a company than an organization. A terrorist organization whose only purpose is to cause chaos around the world. The previous assassination of Bias on Tinner Island was carried out by a killer from the Blackstone organization. The purpose of assassinating Bias and this time of assassinating Marta is to cause a world war and make the world chaotic. This is the ultimate goal of this organization. The leader of the Blackstone organization is a guy codenamed Iron Cage. After reading these memories, I understood the situation. The blue luster in Chen Tao's eyes slowly dissipated. He looked at Scorpion and said lightly, "It turns out that you are the mastermind behind Bias's death." Scorpion's pupils trembled slightly, and her cold face gained a glimmer of disbelief. It seemed like she couldn't believe it. Why did the man in front of her know this? Looking at Scorpion's expression, Chen Tao said, "Are you surprised?" There are some things that you don't want others to know unless you don't do it yourself. I have the ability to read other people's memories. As long as that person has experienced anything, I know. In addition to the forces behind you, I also know everything about you. Have you trained those children as killers, made them kill each other, and made them go through all kinds of pain? Human nature. Chen Tao stared at Scorpion coldly and said, "You are really a pervert. Seeing their pain, you actually get excited." He said slowly, "I will find your leader and have a good talk about life with him. As for you, just regret it in hell." As Chen Tao finished speaking, Scorpion's pupils trembled slightly, and she could see her body slowly turning gray. The gray body withered, and the gray color dispersed like the ashes left by burned trees. Scorpion disappeared with endless questions and fears. Chen Tao sometimes reads a person's memory to obtain information, but the memory of the woman in front of him makes Chen Tao feel uncomfortable. This woman's life is hard to accept. Like Shepherd, Scorpion was born in a place called the Kingdom of Jin. At present, there are only 9 countries where Xiaoyaxing is recognized, but in addition to these 9 countries, there are still some scattered, small and unpopular countries, and the Kingdom of Jin is one of them. The country is extremely poor and many children are abandoned at birth. Scorpion is one of the abandoned orphans. She has no name, only the code name she got after entering the Blackstone organization. An orphan lives in a slum in the Kingdom of Jin. She has been alone since she was a child and has made a living by stealing things since she was a child. Until one time, something happened unexpectedly. He was almost beaten to death, but was rescued by people from the Blackstone organization. The experience at a young age gave Scorpion a strong hatred and hostility towards the world, and even his personality became distorted. She enjoyed torturing people, and the organization asked her to train killers, and her training methods treated children as young as animals. The methods are cruel. Now she is a devil-like existence. Such a person cannot change, she can only die. Most of the reasons why people like Scorpion become like this are due to the brainwashing of the Blackstone organization. Whether it is to prevent the outbreak of a nuclear war on Xiaoyaxing, or to save other innocent children. This Blackstone organization must be destroyed. If we want to destroy the Blackstone organization, we can only take action against the Iron Cage. In addition to being a member of the Blackstone organization, the woman Scorpion also has another identity, that is, she is one of the lovers of the Iron Cage. Through Scorpion's memory, it was not difficult for Chen Tao to find where the Iron Cage now lived. Other side. In an extremely luxurious villa. This is a huge artificial hot spring. In the artificial hot spring, a man with black and white hair sat in the hot spring, leaning against the edge of the hot spring, placing his hands on the shore, closing his eyes comfortably and enjoying it. To the left and right of the man, 2 attractive girls in thin clothes were holding fruit in their hands. They held the fruit with their small hands and put it into the man's mouth. The man took a bite of the fruit handed to him by the girl. He slowly opened his eyes, stretched out his big hand, hugged one of the girls and pulled her into his arms. "Master," the girl blushed and resisted shyly. The man smiled coldly and was about to do something. "Boss," suddenly, a voice sounded. Hearing the sound, the man stopped what he was doing and looked at the source of the sound. "I saw a woman wearing a black uniform walking in slowly on a pair of black high heels. She turned a blind eye to the scene in front of her." Seeing this woman, the man's smile faded, his eyebrows furrowed, and he said, "What's wrong?" The woman said, "I just got the news that the plan to assassinate Marta failed." The man frowned suddenly. "Isn't it Shepherd who is carrying out this mission?" "Shepherd, when did you become so useless?" The man who spoke was the boss of Blackstone, the highest commander of Blackstone, Tialong. The woman who spoke was Tialong's personal secretary Luna. Luna raised her hand, pushed her glasses, and said immediately, "Something strange happened here, look at the big screen." She picked up a tablet and operated it. The big screen hanging on the wall in front of Tialong lit up. The picture appeared on the big screen, and that picture was the picture of Marta being sniped. Tialong looked at this, frowned, and said, "Isn't this successful?" Suddenly, Tialong's pupils condensed slightly, and he saw that the bullet hole on Marta's forehead was recovering. Seeing this, Tialong's expression changed, and he said, "What's going on?" In the picture, Marta ran out of the car, and then there was an explosion, and the fire splashed. The picture turned. In mid-air, Marta was hugged by a man. There was a pair of wings behind the man, just like a god descending from heaven. Seeing this scene, Tialong stood up suddenly and said, "What is this?" Luna said slowly, "Through the video sent to us by Scorpion, we can see that the shepherd had already succeeded, but suddenly a man with wings appeared and rescued Marta." Tialong frowned tightly, his face full of disbelief. "It's hard to believe, isn't it?" Suddenly, a voice sounded. "This is the man's voice." This voice shocked Tialong all over, and he looked at the source of the sound suddenly. Why? It stands to reason that there should be only Tialong and a man in this hot spring room, but now there is a second man's voice in this place. Tialong looked and saw the man standing next to the hot spring, looking at him coldly. This man is the man that Tialong saw in the picture just now. Seeing this man, Tialong's face changed. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 473. Iron Cage said, "Come here. This place is the headquarters of Blackstone Company. The man in front of me actually dares to break into the headquarters, even if he is a god. The Iron Cage is also sure to beat him into a sieve." However, after the Iron Cage roared, it was quiet all around. The Iron Cage was startled, and he looked around. The scene he saw made him feel strong uneasiness and panic. What's going on? Iron Cage found that in this room, except for him, everyone else seemed to be frozen, staying there, unable to move. Not even blinking. Except for himself and the man who suddenly appeared in front of him, everyone else was still. Iron Cage looked at the woman beside him and said, "Hello." But the woman kept looking at Chen Tao, as if she didn't hear what Iron Cage said. This scene was so weird that it made goosebumps all over Tai Cage's body. He looked at Chen Tao in horror. "What did you do?" Everything was normal just now, but as soon as this man appeared, it became like this. Iron Cage had the right to suspect that all this was done by the man in front of him. Chen Tao crossed his arms across his chest, looked at the Iron Cage, and said, "In order to prevent others from disturbing them, I will ask them not to move." Sure enough, it was the man in front of him who did it. Iron Cage's face turned pale. He looked at Chen Tao and said, Are you a god?" Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, "God, forgive me for believing that there is a god in this world." Of course I believe it," Tai Kong said quickly. He came out of the hot spring and knelt down to Chen Tao. He kowtowed to Chen Tao and said, "I, Tai Kong, am the most loyal believer. As long as whatever you need, God, I can offer it to you as long as I have it." In this situation, as long as Iron Cage is not a fool, he will know that with his ability, he is no match for the man in front of him. If the man in front of him actually wants to kill him, it must be easy. Iron Cage is very smart, he chose to give in. Looking at Iron Cage's actions, Chen Tao said calmly, "I believe you also know the reason why I came here. I came here to kill people, and the target is you." He said, "I came to this world just because I don't want to see this world destroyed because of war. But you, on the other hand, actually want to use killing bias to cause a nuclear war in the world, and want to destroy the entire world. You think I can keep you? No, no, no. Iron Cage looked at Chen Tao, his face turned pale and he said, God, my purpose is just to cleanse this world. I just want to break the iron cage called peace. Chen Tao was slightly startled, looked at the iron cage, and said, what do you mean? Tai Leng said, my hometown is in the kingdom of Jin. The kingdom of Jin is just a small country, a small and unpopular country. It is at the junction of the three major countries, the Forest Kingdom, the Western Kingdom, and the Fire Kingdom. In today's world, they keep talking about peace, but in fact, they are still fighting. The war on the borders of these three major countries has lasted for a long time. For these big countries, it is just a small-scale collision and will not have much impact on them. But Iron Cage clenched his fists and said, our kingdom of Jin is just a small country, but they regard it as a battlefield. Our kingdom of Jin has become a chessboard for the three major countries to compete. Our country simply cannot withstand such a war invasion. They have been talking about world peace, but they have not considered the feelings of our Jin country at all. Tai Kong stared at Chen Tao and said, peace, only the strong can have peace, and our people in the Jin country are all dying. Struggling on the edge. This kind of peace is like an iron cage, trapping all the pain of the kingdom of Jin, and no one will pay attention. Only by chaos, only by letting people all over the world feel the pain, will they understand the pain of our golden kingdom. Only in this way can there be true peace. Iron Cage's face was covered with sweat, but his pupils were full of excitement, as if he saw the peace he said had arrived. Looking at the excited expression of the Iron Cage, Chen Tao only felt that his soul was shocked. It's crazy. Chen Tao looked at the Iron Cage and said lightly, Jin Kingdom, your thoughts are too extreme. You did this. Do you really think that peace will come to this Jin Kingdom? What will come then will not be peace, only accelerates the destruction of the Jin Kingdom. If this nuclear war starts, the entire Xia Star will be destroyed. What you will get is not peace, but destruction. The pupils of the Iron Cage were trembling, his face was full of excitement, and he laughed excitedly. Ha ha ha. This laughter made Chen Tao frown slightly. Iron Cage stopped laughing, looked at Chen Tao, and said, God, don't you understand? Only when all human beings die can true peace come. Looking at Iron Cage's ferocious smile, Chen Tao had goosebumps all over his body. Chen Tao said, it's really stupid. As Chen Tao finished speaking, Tai Kong suddenly found that his hand had turned into stone. Seeing this, Tai Zong's face turned pale. He looked at Chen Tao in horror and said, God, I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. His hands were petrified, and the petrification slowly spread. Under the frightened sound of the Iron Cage, his body was completely petrified. The Iron Cage's mouth opened wide, turning into a statue. When the wind blew, the statue turned into powder and dissipated with the wind. Looking at the place where the Iron Cage disappeared, he subconsciously looked at Luna next to him. Chen Tao has lifted the immobilizing effect in the room, and Luna has returned to normal. She looked at the place where the Iron Cage disappeared, then pushed her glasses and looked at Chen Tao. She didn't say anything, just looked at Chen Tao quietly, her expression didn't change at all. Chen Tao met Luna's gaze, and he said lightly, I will come to you later. After leaving a word, his figure disappeared on the spot. Luna looked at this scene, she turned and left, as if nothing had happened. On the other side, in the bedroom of Marta, the Lord of the Western Kingdom, Marta had just finished taking a shower. She was wearing a pink t-shirt and sitting in front of the dressing table, combing her hair. She looked at herself in the mirror, but what she was thinking about were the things that happened before. She thought she was dead, but she didn't expect that she survived. She adjusted her thoughts and put the matter of death aside. What she had to consider now was the survival of the Western Kingdom. Without the help of the Forest Kingdom, and encountering assassins, will those murders be sent by the Fire Kingdom? This is her question. No, a man's voice sounded behind Marta. Hearing the voice, Marta was startled. She saw through the mirror that Chen Tao was standing behind her. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 474. Marta was wearing a thin pink t-shirt that fitted her slender figure. The hem of the t-shirt was very short, and a pair of slender and graceful legs could be seen below. She had long pink hair and a pair of rose-colored eyes. She looked like an exquisite doll, very cute. Marta looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes, opened her thin lips, and said, "Why do you say it's not an assassin sent by the Fire Country?" she asked Chen Tao curiously. Chen Tao said, "I just sent you here to investigate this matter." He said, "I have found the mastermind behind this." Marta's face was serious. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Who is it?" Blackstone Organization. Chen Tian crossed his arms and said, "A terrorist organization active in the dark. Their goal is to make the world chaotic and let a nuclear war break out in the whole world." Blackstone Organization. Marta frowned and said, "I have never heard of this organization. Will a nuclear war break out? If a nuclear war breaks out, won't they die with the people of Xiaoyaxing? Are they so stupid?" Chen Tao said, "The same rice feeds 100 kinds of people. There are all kinds of people in this world. There are only those you can't think of, and there are no ones that can't appear." Speaking of this, Chen Tao looked at Marta, who was thinking, and said, "The people who assassinated Bias before were them." Marta was stunned, and there was a glimmer of disbelief in her eyes. "What?" She stood up, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Bias was killed by them." Her little face was shocked. Chen Tao nodded slightly. Watching Chen Tao nod, Marta bit her lip, her little hand clenched into a pink fist. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Where are those people? I want to see them." The anger surged from her heart to her brain. Now Marta just wanted to see the mastermind behind the scenes and let them feel Bias's pain. Chen Tao said, "I've dealt with them all." "Dealt with?" No, Marta was stunned. She reacted and said no twice. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Can't deal with it? I want to see them." Marta ran to Chen Tao, holding Chen Tao's clothes. She raised her face, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Please, let me see them. I've been looking for them for almost a month. I want to see them." Her rose-colored eyes were filled with tears. She held Chen Tao's clothes with her little hands, and she looked at Chen Tao with a pleading face. Looking at Marta's pleading expression. Doesn't she want Chen Tao to kill those people? No, Chen Tao knew very well that Marta didn't think so. Chen Tao slowly lowered his hands around his chest. He looked at Marta's tearful eyes. He raised his hands and gently wiped the tears from her face, then looked at Marta and said, "What do you want to do?" Marta's face was tearful, her eyes were tearful, and she said, "I want to deal with them myself. I want them to die in pain. I will punish them with the cruelest punishment in the world. Bias, that's my brother. After my parents died, Bias was the only relative I had in the world. Bias, so kind, so gentle, but they killed him." Marta suppressed her emotions, lowered her head, and didn't look at Chen Tao, but just held Chen Tao's hand. The hand on the clothes was a little strong. "They killed him, my only relative, they killed my only relative." Marta gritted her teeth and said, "I must make them pay the price. I must punish them with the cruelest punishment in the world. I want them to live a life worse than death." Marta raised her face, the tears in her eyes reflected the luster. She looked at Chen Tao pleadingly, "Can you hand them over to me?" Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Marta and said, "They are dead, and the mastermind who killed Bias has been dealt with by me." Marta looked at Chen Tao, looked into Chen Tao's eyes, and made sure that Chen Tao was not joking. Marta slowly let go of Chen Tao's clothes. She took 2 steps back in despair, and slumped in the chair in front of the dressing table. She lowered her head and said, "I have been looking for them for almost a month. I have been trying to find the person who hurt Bias. I am very angry. Bias is my brother, my only relative." As she spoke, the tears in her eyes flowed down her cheeks like pearls with broken strings. She lowered her head and let the tears flow down, as if her soul was emptied. "Now they are dead, I have accumulated anger for a month, who should I release it to?" Marta muttered to herself. Her eyes were a little empty, empty. Looking at Marta's expression, Chen Tao fell into deep thought. Chen Tao found a mistake. He should have handed the people of Blackstone to her for disposal. For Marta, her brother Bias was her only relative, and the only relative died. That kind of pain felt like Chen Tao lost Ziking. That feeling was unimaginable. Chen Tao looked at Marta's soulless look, and his heart softened. For a moment, he stepped closer to Marta and hugged her in his arms without saying anything. Marta was startled, and she didn't think much about it when she felt the embrace of the man. Her little head was hidden in Chen Tao's arms, and she sobbed with sobs. The sound was very small and suppressed. Chen Tao gently stroked Marta's hair and said softly, "If you want to cry, just cry out loud, I'll accompany you." The gentle voice penetrated into Marta's ears, sank into her heart, and filled her heart. Her helplessness, grievances, and the huge pressure of being the ruler of the Western country all came to her in an instant. Woo woo woo. Marta burst into tears, crying loudly in Chen Tao's arms. All Chen Tao could do was to hug her gently, gently stroke her hair, and comfort her. Unconsciously, Chen Tao felt that the movement in his arms stopped. He looked down and found that Marta had closed her eyes and fell asleep, and her face was still full of tears. Too sleepy? Chen Tao didn't think much about it. He picked up Marta, walked to the bed, and put her on the bed. He looked at Marta, who was already asleep, and there was a wet towel in his hand, wiping the tears on her face. He helped Marta cover the quilt, and turned to leave. Suddenly, Chen Tao felt the corner of his clothes tighten slightly. Chen Tao was slightly startled, and he looked back. Maybe because of Chen Tao's action just now, Marta has woken up. She held the corner of Chen Tao's clothes with her small hands, and looked at Chen Tao with her big eyes, which showed helplessness and pleading. Marta opened her mouth slightly. "Stay, okay." Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Marta's helpless expression and her big eyes that were still full of tears. His heart softened and he nodded slightly. He got on the bed and lay beside Marta. He lay on his side and looked at Marta. Marta didn't hesitate at all, and snuggled into Chen Tao's arms with her eyes closed. Chen Tao gently hugged her, stroked her hair, and comforted her. Comforting a little girl, this kind of thing is already very familiar to Chen Tao. After a while, Marta fell asleep again because she was too tired. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 475. Chen Tao looked at the girl in his arms. She fell asleep, sleeping soundly. She was Marta, the ruler of the West Country, but apart from her status as ruler, she was just a little girl. Her hair color and eye color were different from those of the Earthlings. Her hair was pink and her pupils were rose-colored. Although she was from Xiaoyaxing, and her hair color and eye color were different, her feelings were real. There was no difference from Chen Tao, who was an Earthling. When her relatives were killed, she would also feel pain, anger, and lose her mind. She lost her relatives and was unable to take revenge herself, so she was in great pain and could not extricate herself. But when she was helpless, she would also show her weak side, hoping that someone would give her a warm hug. Chen Tao met her needs. Very close. Chen Tao looked at the small face in front of him. The girl in front of him was slightly older than Betty, but smaller than the young girl Li Xiaolu. Her body was small, just like a doll. Looking at her closely, Her skin was white and delicate, without any pores, and her eyelashes were long and narrow. She had a high nose bridge, and below that was a thin lip. She wore a pink t-shirt that fit her slender figure. The t-shirt was very short, and her legs were long and straight. She nestled in Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao could smell her unique body fragrance, which was a fragrance similar to that of gardenia, and he could also feel her body temperature. In addition to these, he could feel her petiteness and fragility. Chen Tao was somewhat helpless. How could a man like Chen Tao, who was full of vigor, stay with such a lovely girl? But as a gentleman, Chen Tao did not intend to take advantage of others' misfortune. But, he had to give some interest, right? Chen Tao looked at the small and lovely face in front of him, his eyes fell on her thin lips, he leaned in and kissed her like a dragonfly touching the water. Separated. Chen Tao looked at her. Suddenly, Chen Tao felt her move. She moved and hid her body and face in Chen Tao's arms. Chen Tao was stunned. He looked at the little face in his arms. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, and her eyes were still closed. Ah! She woke up. I'm a little sleepy, don't do it yet, okay, her voice was very light, as if it came from a dream. Ah, as expected, she was awake. Suddenly, even Chen Tao felt his old face getting hot. He just thought she was cute and couldn't help but want to kiss her secretly and then leave. But he never expected that she was awake. This feeling of being caught as a thief is not very good. Chen Tao felt his old face getting hot. But he thought about it and was a little confused. What did she mean by this? She didn't resist, but was just sleepy, so she suggested waiting for her to wake up. Chen Tao blinked his eyes, his thoughts were full of thoughts, but now he could only slowly close his eyes. Accompany her to rest. Time passed by minute by minute. 3 hours later. The young girl Marta's eyelashes moved and she slowly opened her eyes. As soon as she regained consciousness, Marta realized that she was wrapped in a warm embrace. Very warm, this is more fascinating than the quilt in winter. Realizing that she was in the arms of that man, Marta's body was warm and her heart was warm. Marta lost her only relative, and she needed to face the pressure of revenge from the West. As the ruler of the West, Marta, after losing Bias, she had no one to help her share the pressure. Marta felt unprecedented pressure during this period, as if the sky had fallen. She felt that she could not bear it, she needed to rely on, she needed someone she could rely on. And now she has it. Marta raised her face and looked at the face of the man who provided her with an embrace. Before, Marta didn't feel anything, but now looking at the sleeping face of this man, the more she looked at him, the more she felt that he was handsome. She thought of what this man did before going to bed, her face blushed, and she moved closer to Chen Tao. Following Chen Tao, she kissed him and separated immediately. Marta's face flushed. Marta blushed and moved her small body closer to Chen Tao's arms, just like a kitten tossing on the sofa. His big hands gently hugged Marta's waist, which was so slender that it could be held in one hand. Marta was startled, her face blushed, and she raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Their eyes met. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Awake." Marta's little face blushed, she didn't dare to look at Chen Tao, and hid her face in Chen Tao's arms. This man is different from Bias. Bias is Marta's younger brother, and they are blood relatives. So, when Bias and Marta get along, it's like a sister and a brother. But this man is different. If you get along with him, it's a man-woman relationship. And Marta has no experience in maintaining such a relationship. But from what she had heard and seen, Marta also knew that if she wanted to maintain a relationship between a man and a woman, she would have to go through some things. And those were things Marta didn't dare to think about. Chen Tao looked at Marta and said with a smile, "Are you not sleepy now?" Marta was startled, her face flushed, and she said, "Well, Her rose-colored eyes moved. She was a little nervous and uneasy. Looking at Marta's expression, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Then can we continue what we did before you fell asleep?" Marta hid her face deeply in Chen Tao's arms, her eyes half closed. Her response was another sound coming from her nose, as if it came from the clouds. This was a promise. Chen Tao looked at Marta's obedient appearance. Chen Tao's big hand fell on Marta's cheek and held her little face. Their eyes met. Chen Tao looked at Marta's watery eyes, and he moved closer to her face. And all Marta could do was close her eyes. It was still evening, and in the blink of an eye, it was midnight. The bedroom was dark, and only the moonlight coming in from the window could see the scenery inside the house. Tao, a voice sounded in Chen Tao's ears. Chen Tao, who heard this voice, looked at Marta. Marta nestled in Chen Tao's arms, and her cheeks were still flushed. Marta closed her eyes and hid her face in Chen Tao's arms. "Tao." She called Chen Tao softly, meaninglessly. Chen Tao didn't know what she was doing. He stroked Marta's hair and said gently, "What's wrong?" Marta had a faint smile on her face. She closed her eyes and comfortably felt the warmth of the big hand on her head. She said, "No. I just want to call your name." Chen Tao smiled. He stayed with Marta for a while. "Will you stay here forever?" Marta said infatuatedly. Chen Tao said gently, "I will leave tomorrow." Hearing this, Chen Tao clearly felt Marta's body stiffen. Chen Tao looked at Marta, and there was a trace of uneasiness in Marta's eyes. Looking at Marta's expression, Marta said, then will you come back?" Chen Tao could see that Marta was a little nervous and a little uneasy. This man did everything. She thought he would stay with her forever, but now he said that he would leave tomorrow. How could Martin not be nervous and uneasy? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 476. Chen Tao saw Marta's uneasiness. He approached Marta and kissed Marta's forehead. "Don't worry, I'm going back, just home," he said. "I'll come back to see you later." Hearing this, Marta's eyes shone with a hint of light. No words were spoken. The two of them were a little tender. Chen Tao stroked her hair with his big hand, then got up and got out of bed. "Get dressed." Halfway through getting dressed, a voice came. "Tao." Chen Tao was slightly startled. He turned back to look at Marta. Marta was wearing a pink t-shirt, sitting at the head of the bed, looking at Chen Tao with big eyes. Chen Tao smiled and said, "What's wrong?" She looked at Chen Tao and said, "I'm a little worried about the Fire Country." She said, "I'm afraid the Fire Country will attack." This is what Marta is most worried about. Before, the West used nuclear bombs against the Fire Country, and the Fire Country also responded with a nuclear bomb to the West. Although the Fire Country has not made any moves in the past month, for Marta, she is still worried. After all, the West Country and the Fire Country are still hostile to each other, and the Forest Country does not intend to help the West Country. Now, the only person Marta can rely on is Chen Tao. She can only tell Chen Tao about her worries before he leaves and find a solution. Chen Tao looked at Marta. There was a gleam in Marta's eyes, and her little face was helpless. For Marta, the only one who can help her now is Chen Tao. If Chen Tao abandons her, then Marta will once again face the pressure that is like the sky falling, enough to crush her little shoulders. If at this time, Chen Tao ignores Marta and goes back directly, then for Marta, it will definitely be chilling. Chen Tao is not stupid, of course he knows this. So, Chen Tao sat on the bed, holding Marta's little hand, wrapping her little hand with his big hand, and looking into her eyes. The four eyes met. Chen Tao looked at Marta and smiled. Looking at the smile on Chen Tao's face, Marta's eyes glowed with a hint of light. At the moment of Bias's death, Marta felt that her world was only dark. She was the only one left in the world. She could not see any hope, and she felt that she was abandoned. Then without Bias's help, the huge pressure of the West was directly pressed on her small shoulders. She was very helpless. And now looking at Chen Tao's smile and his gentle eyes, Marta felt that the dark time suddenly had a ray of light. The huge pressure seemed to dissipate a little. She looked at Chen Tao seriously and said, "Tao, do you have a solution?" Chen Tao looked into Marta's big eyes, he held Marta's small hand, pulled her to his side, and held her small hand with his two big hands. He smiled and said, "It's not that there is a solution, but that it has been solved." Marta was stunned, and she looked at Chen Tao. "What do you mean? Solved?" Marta pursed her lips, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Why do you say that?" Chen Tao smiled and said, "Do you know why the Fire Nation stopped taking action and stopped military activities after dropping a nuclear bomb on you last month?" Marta's eyes were shining, and she said, "I don't know too much." She seemed to remember something and looked at Chen Tao suddenly. She said, "Is it you?" Chen Tao smiled and said, "I said I want to stop the nuclear war. Then, of course, I have to stop the war between you and the Fire Nation. The last time I came, I had already talked to Sun Hao, the Lord of the Fire Nation." Marta's eyes were shining, she looked at Chen Tao, her rose-colored eyes were full of joy. "What did you talk about?" She looked at Chen Tao seriously. Chen Tao said, "I asked him to stop the war, and he agreed." Marta had a smile on her face. Since Chen Tao came here and saw Marta this time, she has never smiled on her little face, and she looks worried. Until now, she finally has a smile on her face. She looked relaxed, like a little girl getting candy, with an innocent and bright smile. She stretched out her hand, hugged Chen Tao's neck, leaned into his arms, kissed him on the face, and said with a smile, "You are so nice, you are Marta's good man." Chen Tao smiled when he heard it. He turned over and laid Marta flat on the bed. He looked closely into Marta's eyes and said with a smile, "Is there anything that can compensate a good man?" Marta's face flushed with two blushes, and her clear rose-colored eyes were filled with a trace of moisture. The smile on her face seemed to be shy and happy. She blinked, raised her hands, and hugged Chen Tao's neck. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Whatever you want, as long as Marta has it, Marta will give it to you." Chen Tao smiled and said, "Aren't you afraid?" Marta looked at Chen Tao timidly. She was a little timid for a while. She said, "Afraid?" Chen Tao smiled and gently stroked Marta's face. Marta held Chen Tao's big hand, and she looked at Chen Tao seriously, "But you are Marta's man." Her eyes were shining, and her expression was serious. Chen Tao smiled and kissed Marta's forehead. He said, "Next time, you should take care of yourself and accompany me again." Marta was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao, pursed her lips, and smiled. Chen Tao stood up. Marta also sat up and looked at Chen Tao. "Are you leaving?" Chen Tao nodded slightly, he looked at Marta and said, "I will be back later." Marta hummed, she said, "I will wait for you." As Marta finished speaking, Chen Tao disappeared. Marta looked at the place where Chen Tao disappeared, her eyes were shining, and there was a joyful smile on her face, saying, "My man is a god who can care for people." She was very happy. On the other side, in a room, Luna had just finished taking a shower, wearing a bathrobe, sitting on the sofa, crossing her legs, looking at the TV screen in front of her. The TV screen was bright, and a TV series was playing. Although Luna seemed to be looking at the TV screen, her mind was elsewhere. Luna was the secretary of the Blackstone boss, and the Blackstone organization was a terrorist organization, and now the boss was dead. If this news spread, the entire organization would fall into chaos. What to do? Luna didn't know what to do, she had never encountered such a situation. But as Tai Long's secretary, Luna has seen a lot of big scenes, and she is very calm. While thinking about this problem, Luna has another question. The man who killed her boss told Luna that he would come to her again. What to do? This is another problem. Tai Long is dead, and you are still watching TV here as his secretary. How leisurely a voice sounded beside Luna. Luna was slightly startled, and she subconsciously looked at the source of the voice. At a glance, Chen Tao was standing there, looking at her. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 477. It was the man in front of him who killed Luna's boss, and he was indeed here. When Luna saw Chen Tao, she was not that surprised. The person in front of me is not a human being, but a god. Luna saw with her own eyes that the man in front of her saved Marta, the leader of the Western Kingdom who was supposed to be dead. She had also seen Chen Tao's wings, so naturally Luna regarded Chen Tao as a god. Luna was very calm. She was not surprised or yelled. She just stood up slowly, looked at Chen Tao and said, "You came to me, what's the matter?" Chen Tao looked at the calm Luna. He crossed his arms and said, "Luna, the princess of the kingdom of Jin, is also the most capable assistant of Iron Cage." Luna was startled, her eyebrows furrowed, she looked at Chen Tao seriously, her eyebrows slowly relaxed. This is Luna's biggest secret, and only Iron Cage and Luna know the secret. Iron Cage's actions are supported by the leader of the kingdom of Jin, and Luna is the person arranged by the king to be beside Iron Cage to assist Iron Cage. Of course, Luna also has the responsibility of monitoring the Iron Cage. This is who Luna is. But no one else knows the secret except Iron Cage and Luna. Because if Luna's identity is revealed and other countries realize that Jin state supports terrorist actions, then Jin state will be in catastrophe. But Luna never expected that the man in front of her would reveal her identity directly. Luna was a little shocked at first, but after thinking about it, she felt relieved when she thought about the ability of the man in front of her. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "You are a god. I am not surprised that you know this. It's just that you know this and come to me again. What is your purpose?" Chen Tao looked at Luna and said, "I know I am a god, but why don't I kneel down and kowtow?" Luna said, "If you want me to kneel down and kowtow, I can kneel down." Her expression was cold, and she concluded that Chen Tao was a god, but there was no respect in her expression. Chen Tao looked at Luna. Is this woman suffering from facial paralysis? Chen Tao found that from the time he met Luna until now, except for a slight change in her expression when Chen Tao revealed her identity just now, there was no other change in her face. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, he looked at Luna and said, "Are you not respectful to God?" Before, many of the people Chen Tao met knelt down and kowtowed to Chen Tao when they saw him displaying high technology. The woman in front of her said that Chen Tao was a god, but she didn't show any respect. This is very strange. Luna crossed her chest with her hands, her white lotus-like arms, around herself. She looked at Chen Tao. Although the kingdom of Jin is a country, it is actually a purgatory. I remember that when I was 15 years old, I prayed to God. I knelt in the church for 3 days and 3 nights, without eating or drinking, and prayed to God to save the kingdom of Jin. Even if it is to give the kingdom of Jin a day of peace. Luna looked at Chen Tao and said, "But in the end, nothing changed. From that time on, I felt that either there was no God in this world, or even God would not save us. To save the kingdom of Jin, we can only rely on ourselves." She looked at Chen Tao. This is why Luna is disrespectful to Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at Luna's expression and said, "So, you support that guy's madness? Do you think that can bring peace to the kingdom of Jin?" Luna said, his actions are indeed crazy, but they may not have no chance of success. Rather than waiting for the demise of the Jinn kingdom, we would rather do something and change something. In this way, Chen Tao understood. There is a saying that goes well, if you are in a hurry, seek medical treatment. When the situation is bad enough, then all ideas about saving the kingdom of Jinn will be accepted. Even if it means destroying the world to save the kingdom of Jinn. After all, not everyone is sane. This thing sounds incredible, but the reality is so strange. Chen Tao sighed slightly and said, "Do you want to know why I came to you?" Luna looked at Chen Tao but said nothing. Chen Tao said, "Before I tell you the purpose of coming here, I have to confess something to you. I am not a god." Luna was stunned and looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao said lightly, "Everything you see is just what I did using high-tech means. But when technology reaches a certain level, people will also be regarded as gods. So, what you said is not wrong. It's not that God is cold, it's that there is no God in this world." Luna was silent and didn't speak. Chen Tao crossed his arms and said, "Then let me tell you my purpose of coming to you. My purpose of coming to you is to save the kingdom of Jinn." This is what Chen Tao chose to do after learning about the situation in the kingdom of Jinn. He has read the memory of Scorpion, the memory of Iron Cage, and the memory of Luna. Through their memories, Chen Tao understood the situation in the kingdom of Jinn and how cruel the current environment in the kingdom of Jinn was. Therefore, Chen Tao wanted to save the kingdom of Jinn. And even if the Jinn kingdom is not saved, even if organizations like Blackstone are destroyed, they will appear one after another. The chaos will not stop. Therefore, Chen Tao made this choice. After hearing Chen Tao's words, Luna was stunned for a moment. Her expressionless face had a hint of surprise. She stared at Chen Tao and said, "You want to help us? Why?" She was a little unbelievable. She said, "What you want is world peace, and we are the ones who intend to destroy peace. We are your enemies." Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Luna, who was in disbelief. He said, "No, you are wrong. Your enemy is not me, and my enemy is not you. We have a common enemy, that is chaos." He said, "The chaos of the Jinn kingdom, the chaos of the world, this is our enemy. As long as the chaos of the Jinn kingdom is resolved, the chaos of the world will be resolved." Chen Tao looked at Luna and said, "Right." Luna opened her mouth slightly, she slowly closed her mouth and looked at Chen Tao. She opened her mouth again, and slowly closed it again. She closed her eyes and adjusted her mood. After adjusting her mood, she slowly opened her eyes, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Then, what do you want me to do?" Looking at Luna's demeanor, Chen Tao crossed his arms, looked at Luna, and said, "Accompany me to the Jinn kingdom, let me see the pain you are facing in the Jinn kingdom." Luna looked at Chen Tao, looking at the tall and thin man in front of her. Luna had a strange feeling. All along, Luna was like living in a swamp, her whole body was wrapped in the swamp, as if she was swallowed by the swamp at any time and anywhere. She could not feel any hope, she only had despair. And the man standing there in front of her was like a light, illuminating her. It was like a rope. A rope that could pull her out of the swamp. Luna chose to hold this rope that symbolized hope. She said, "Okay. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 478. Inside Jinn. The streets of Jinn were in tatters, and black earth houses that seemed to collapse at any time could be seen everywhere. At this time, in an alley, a 12-year-old girl with dirty hair, she was wearing a loose and worn t-shirt, which was probably white, but it looked gray because it had been worn for too long and had not been washed, and she was also wearing a pair of loose and old pants. She lowered her head, her face was hidden under her dirty hair, and her face could not be seen. The girl's name was Xioxi. Xioxi was not given to her by her parents, She herself had no name. This name was given to herself by her own learning from the adults. Zioxy was very hungry. She had not eaten for 3 days, and she was very hungry. She gritted her teeth, got up, and walked to the street. She lowered her head, her eyes looked through the gap in her hair at a fruit stall on the street, and looking at the fruits on the fruit stall, she couldn't help swallowing her saliva. Her eyes moved, looking at the fish on the fish stall next to her, and she slowly lowered her head. No one was buying anything at the fruit stall, but the fish stall was surrounded by people. Zioxy sneaked up to the fish stall, stretched out her little hand, reached out from the gap in the crowd, and held a fish. "Take it back." She hid the fish in her arms and ran away quickly. "Stop," hearing the angry roar of the fish stall owner behind her. Zioxy was scared to death, and she ran away in panic. The fish stall owner was chasing behind her, and the heavy footsteps drilled into Zioxy's ears. Zioxy's face turned pale. She didn't even dare to look back, and could only run out frantically. She didn't know how long she ran. When she didn't hear the footsteps behind her, she went into an alley, leaned against the wall, and gasped for breath. She seemed to have lost all her strength, leaned against the wall, slowly softened, and squatted on the ground. Zioxy took the fish in her arms out and looked at it. Her eyes were filled with tears. She was abandoned here by her parents a year ago. During this year, she suffered from hunger and cold. The only food she had was begging and rummaging through garbage dumps. At first, she could get something by begging, but later it was gone. After that, she started to rummage through garbage dumps, and now there was very little food in the garbage dumps. She didn't want to steal, but she had no other choice. Looking at the dead fish in her hand, she opened her mouth and took a bite. It was not cooked and it was fishy. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she ate while crying. Woo woo woo. She choked while eating. It was very unpalatable, but she was almost starving and didn't care about anything. "Fish, eating like this is not good for your health," a voice came. Hearing this voice, Zioxy was startled. She raised her face and looked forward. There stood a man and a woman. The man was the one who spoke. The man looked at her with gentle eyes, and he said, "Give me the fish." The man was Chen Tao, and the woman was Luna. With the help of a micro wormhole, Chen Tao and Luna came to the kingdom of Jin. As soon as he arrived, Chen Tao saw the little girl stealing things. When Zioxy heard this, she hurriedly hid the fish behind her. She looked at Chen Tao nervously and said, "No, this is mine." Chen Tao was stunned. Thinking about it, Chen Tao understood that she thought Chen Tao was going to steal her food, so she was nervous. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm not here to steal your food. On the contrary, I'm here to give you food." Speaking of this, he stretched out his hand, and a piece of grilled steak wrapped in oil paper appeared in his hand. The grilled steak appeared, and a thyme fragrance factor overflowed, and the aroma came. Zioxy's big eyes stared straight at the grilled steak in Chen Tao's hand. She was so hungry that she didn't care how the grilled steak appeared out of thin air. What was more important to her now was whether the grilled steak would go into her stomach. Seeing Zioxy's expression, Chen Tao squatted down and handed the grilled steak to Zioxy. Zioxy quickly reached out to take it, and then took a big bite. Probably because it was hot, Zioxy frowned, opened her mouth to blow away the heat, and chewed. It was very hot, but she couldn't bear to spit it out. Zioxy wolfed down the steak. Watching Zioxy's movements, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Children like her can be found everywhere in Jin. Now this is the capital of Jin, people's lives are a little better, and there are stalls on the street, giving her the opportunity to steal things. Luna explained to Chen Tao. She said, "In other places outside the capital, there are no stalls. People eat tree roots and bark. Even if they want to steal, they don't have the opportunity to steal. Many people will starve to death. Luna looked at Zioxy indifferently, her expression did not change at all, she seemed to have gotten used to this scene. Chen Tao looked at the dirty little girl in front of him. He stood up, thinking about looking around first. Seeing Chen Tao leave, Luna followed Chen Tao. Chen Tao was halfway there, or she heard footsteps coming. Soon, the corner of her clothes tightened slightly. He was startled, turned around and looked at his side. Zioxy held the fish in one hand and the corner of Chen Tao's clothes in the other hand. She raised her dirty face and looked at Chen Tao with big eyes. Her face was not clearly visible because of the hair and dirt, but her clear eyes were very bright. There was pleading and helplessness in her clear and bright eyes. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Want to follow me?" Zioxy nodded quickly. Chen Tao said, "Okay, then before you follow me, throw the fish away first." Zioxy was stunned. She raised her left hand and looked at the fish in her left hand. She bit her lower lip. Although she was reluctant, she still threw the fish on the ground. Zioxy looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Let's go. I'll take you to take a bath." Zioxy's eyes were bright and she hummed. Luna, who was watching this scene, felt strange. There are so many people struggling on the verge of death in this world, and there are countless people who starve to death. But, those people have not met people like Chen Tao. If there were more people like Chen Tao, perhaps there would not be so many people who starved to death. The three of them came to a room. Zioxy was arranged by Chen Tao to take a bath in the bathroom. In the room, only Chen Tao and Luna were left. Luna sat on the edge of the bed, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "What are you going to do next?" Chen Tao was lying on the bed, he looked at Luna, and said, "I want you to be a hero, what do you think?" Luna was stunned, "Hero?" Hearing this, Chen Tao said, "I can provide you with some high-tech military weapons to help you become omnipotent. You use the weapons to protect the territory of the Jin Kingdom. How about it?" Her eyes lit up slightly. High-tech military weapons come from the technology of a godlike strong man. If you can use military to strengthen your country, then it is naturally what Luna wants. If I can have high-tech military weapons to protect my country, then of course I want it. Luna looked at Chen Tao seriously. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 479. Chen Tao turned over and sat up from the bed. He looked at Luna and said, "Then I'll give you this." He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A mecha appeared in front of Luna. Luna was slightly startled. She looked at the mecha. The mecha was in human form and about the same size as Luna. Chen Tao crossed his arms and leaned against the head of the bed, saying, "This is a humanoid mecha. As long as you wear it, you won't be hurt even if a nuclear bomb hits you. It has the ability to fly, and its speed can exceed the speed of sound and approach light. It uses stellar energy. As long as the stars in your galaxy do not go out, it will have a constant supply of energy. As for its attack methods, there are two, one is a lightsaber, and the other is a long-range firearm." He looked at Luna and said, "As long as you study it, I believe you will be able to use it." Luna's eyes were shining, and she looked at the obviously female mecha in front of her. She walked around the mech, looking at it, and said, "How do I put it on?" Chen Tao said, "I have logged your information on it. You need to call its name, Black Armor. It will automatically wear on you." After listening to Chen Tao, although Luna did not fully understand what Chen Tao said at the end, he still understood some of Chen Tao's words. She said without hesitation, "Black Armor." As Luna's voice fell, the black armor automatically untied and then reassembled on Luna. All of a sudden, Luna's body was wrapped in black armor. Luna raised her hand wrapped in black armor and looked at it. Chen Tao looked at the woman wrapped in the black mecha in front of him. He looked at Luna and said, "Remember, the purpose of this mecha is to let you protect the territory of Jin from being invaded and protect the people of Jin from being oppressed by war. I don't want you to use this mecha to invade other people's territory." Luna looked at Chen Tao and said, "I just want Jin to no longer be invaded by the three major countries, that's all." Well. Chen Tao looked at Luna's face, but her face was hidden in the mecha, and Chen Tao couldn't see her expression. However, Chen Tao knew her expression even if he didn't look at it. It is estimated that behind the dark mecha, it is still the same as usual, with a paralyzed face. Crack. There was a sound coming from the bathroom. Chen Tao and Luna looked over there together. At first glance, Chen Tao's eyes lit up slightly. The bathroom door had been opened, and a beautiful figure walked out of the bathroom. In front of Chen Tao was a slender girl. She had long, smooth golden hair and a delicate and lovely face. She was wearing a thin shirt that Chen Tao had given her. The shirt fit her slender figure. The hem of the shirt was very short, and her legs were long and straight. The whole person looked like an exquisite doll, graceful and quite cute. This was very strange. Looking at the beautiful girl in front of him. Not only Chen Tao was surprised, but Luna was also a little surprised. The girl looked at Chen Tao with her clear blue eyes and said, I'm done washing." Her voice was very light, revealing anxiety and inferiority. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Don't be so scared. Can you tell me, what's your name?" The girl looked at Chen Tao and said, "My name is Xioxi." The voice was light and timid. Chen Tao nodded slightly. He sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the girl, and said, "Why did you steal things on the street?" Although Chen Tao could read the girl's memory at will and knew what she had experienced, memories were other people's privacy and he couldn't avoid reading them if he could. And Chen Tao didn't have the habit of looking at other people's memories. "Ask if you can." Chen Tao wanted to know the details of Xioxi. The girl looked at Chen Tao and said, "I'm hungry." Chen Tao raised his hand and touched the back of his head. He knew that the girl stole things because she was hungry. His question just now was asking why Xioxi fell into this situation. But Xioxi was young and didn't think about answering too much. She answered whatever Chen Tao asked. Why did she steal things? The reason was of course because she was hungry. Xioxi looked at Chen Tao and said, "Big brother, will you give me food later?" Her blue eyes looked at Chen Tao expectantly. It seems that she was starving. In other words, Xioxi had been hungry for so long, and now she was most afraid of being hungry. She wanted to confirm it. Chen Tao looked at Xioxi's clear blue eyes and looked at her innocent and expectant look. Chen Tao still felt something special. In the kingdom of Jin, such a charming girl can be easily kidnapped with just a piece of meat. Looking at Xioxi's innocent look, Chen Tao smiled and said, "Of course, I will make sure you have enough to eat every day." Xioxi's eyes lit up slightly, and a smile appeared on her face, saying, "Yeah." Looking at Xioxi's cute response, Chen Tao raised his hand and touched Xioxi's hair. Xioxi was startled. She looked at Chen Tao, looking at Chen Tao's gentle smile and eyes. Xioxi's eyes had a hint of joy. She slowly closed her eyes, feeling the touch of the big hand. His hands were different from Xioxi's own. His hands were a little rough, and at the same time, big and warm. Since being abandoned, Xioxi felt like a wild dog for a year. Every time she met someone's eyes, they looked at her like a stray dog. There was pity, but more disgust and nausea. Unconsciously, Xioxi's character became very humble. She felt that she was a stray dog, an abandoned stray dog. Dignity and other things were not important. What mattered was being able to survive. In Xioxi's world, there was only endless despair. And now a big hand was stroking her hair, and it was very gentle. That was gentleness. He did not treat her with pity for a stray dog, nor with disgust and nausea for a dirty stray dog. But gentleness. The warmth flowed into Zioxy's heart. Chen Tao withdrew his hand and got off the bed. He looked at Luna and said, "Then I'll go back first. You have this mecha, and I believe you have the ability to change the current situation of the Jin Kingdom. I hope you can make use of it." "I will." Luna calmed down and said. Chen Tao looked at Zioxy beside him and stretched out his hand to Zioxy. Zioxy was startled. She looked at Chen Tao, and then at the big hand that Chen Tao held out. Chen Tao's outstretched hand, for Chen Tao, was just a simple outstretched hand. But for Zioxy, the hand in front of her symbolized hope. In this year, Zioxy prayed countless times for someone to save her, and countless times hoped that she was abandoned and it was just a nightmare. But none of her prayers were useful. Every time she woke up, she was lying on the roadside, dirty all over. Every day when she woke up, she found that reality was still reality. And now, the hand in front of her is what Zioxy dreamed of, the hand that she wanted to see in her dreams, the hand that could save her from the sea of suffering. Zioxy raised her little hand and placed it on Chen Tao's big hand. Chen Tao closed his big hand and held her little hand. He smiled at Zioxy and said, "I'll take you home." Zioxy hummed, and there was a smile on her face, which looked like a sunny day after the dark clouds. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 480. Zioxy looked at the man in front of her, and she was waiting for him to take her away. Suddenly, Zioxy felt that the surroundings were dark. She came back to her senses, and when she came back to her senses, Zioxy was slightly stunned, and she looked around. In an instant, Zioxy found that the surrounding environment had changed. The mecha woman who was standing there just now disappeared, and the bedroom became different from before. This bed, this sofa, this cabinet. It is completely different from the style of the bedroom just now. What's going on? Zioxy looked at Chen Tao. She wanted to ask, but she didn't dare to ask. Chen Tao let go of Zioxy's hand. He sat on the edge of the bed by himself, looked at Zioxy, and said with a smile, "This will be where you live in the future, and you don't need to sleep on the dirty street in the future." Zioxy was stunned. She looked around, looking at this bedroom that was more spacious than the previous one. She walked around, looked around, and her eyes looked at the floor-to-ceiling window in front of her. Walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked at the blue sky and white clouds outside. She was sure that this was not the room just now. At this moment, this man took her from one place to another. And he also wanted to give this room to her. Zioxy looked at the blue sky and white clouds outside through the French window. She subconsciously looked at Chen Tao and said, "Am I dead?" Chen Tao was stunned. He originally wanted to see Zioxy's happy look, but Chen Tao never expected that he would see Zioxy's panic. She stared at Chen Tao blankly with tears in her eyes. She seemed very scared. Zioxy looked at Chen Tao seriously and said, "Is this heaven? Or hell?" Hearing this, Chen Tao was a little confused. He said, "Why do you think so?" Zioxy pursed her lips, retracted her gaze, looked at the scenery outside the French window, and said, "It is impossible for someone to give me such delicious food, and it is impossible for someone to let me take such a comfortable bath. It is impossible for people to take me to another place in an instant." Zioxy said, "It is impossible for someone to give me a place to live. There is only one possibility. I am dead. This is either hell or heaven." She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Tell me, okay? I don't want lies." Her sapphire-like eyes were watery. Looking at Zioxy's expression, Chen Tao couldn't help but touch the back of his head. He smiled and said, "You thought wrong. I really didn't expect that Zioxy would actually think that she was dead. However, on second thought, it is also reasonable for her to think so in the face of these incomprehensible things in front of her, coupled with the impact of various things. Zioxy was slightly startled. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Wrong." Chen Tao said, "Yes, this is neither heaven nor hell, but my residence. I brought you here from there in the blink of an eye, not because you died, but because I used a high-tech thing called a micro-wormhole." He looked at Zioxy, who was confused, and said with a smile, "You are still young, and you probably won't understand even if I tell you. Simply put, this is a high-tech technology." Zioxy was a little confused, but after hearing Chen Tao's sure answer, she slowly regrouped. She said, "I'm really not dead." Chen Tao nodded slightly and said with a smile, "Of course, you are still alive and well." Zioxy had a smile on her face, and she smiled. Innocent and simple. Looking at Zioxy's smile, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. He couldn't help but smile and said, "Let's go, I'll take you out for a walk and learn about this place." Zioxy hummed, she was eager to try, and said, "Okay." She walked over and held Chen Tao's big hand as if habitually. Chen Tao felt his fingers being held, and he subconsciously glanced at Zioxy. Zioxy was full of curiosity, looking around with big eyes, not paying attention to his small action. She actually took the initiative to hold Chen Tao's hand, which was a sign of dependence. Only when a person depends on another person will he be so defenseless. Chen Tao retracted his gaze and opened the door. He took Zioxy out of the door. Walking in the wide and long corridor. Zioxy's little face was full of curiosity, looking here and there. "Master," an artificial man greeted Chen Tao. Chen Tao glanced at the number of the artificial man, which was number 2. Chen Tao nodded slightly, he looked at Zioxy and said, "This is number 2, she is an artificial human, a robot made by humans. There are many people who look like her here. You can recognize them by looking at the numbers on their chests." Zioxy hummed, she looked at No 2's number, then looked at number 2, smiled sweetly and said, "Sister No 2." Number 2 had a smile unique to the artificial human on her face. She nodded slightly and said, "Miss Zioxy." Zioxy's eyes were shining with a hint of light. Chen Tao looked at number 2 and said, "Okay, go and get busy." Number 2 nodded and left. Chen Tao retracted his gaze, looked at Zioxy, and smiled, "If you don't understand anything, or if there is anything you want to do, you can tell the artificial human, they will help you solve it." Zioxy hummed, she looked forward and said, "That's Miss No 1." Number 1 was walking over, and when she heard Zioxy's voice, she smiled and nodded slightly, "Miss Zioxy." Zioxy's eyes were shining with a hint of light. After saying hello, number 1 walked over. Zioxy looked at Chen Tao and said, "How come they all know me?" Hearing this, Chen Tao touched the back of his head and smiled, "For some special reasons, it's hard to explain here." In order to better serve Chen Tao and meet his needs, number 1 and the others kept an eye on Chen Tao 24 hours a day. Of course they knew Zioxy's identity. This is hard to explain. Chen Tao was too lazy to explain. "The restaurant is in front, where we eat," Chen Tao said with a smile. When she heard about the place to eat, Zioxy's eyes lit up slightly. Her face was full of expectations. It's natural for a person who is often hungry to like food. Chen Tao smiled and took her into the restaurant. As soon as they entered the restaurant, Chen Tao found someone in the restaurant. In front of the dining table, a little loli was sitting on a high chair, holding a knife and fork in her hand, cutting a steak. Noticing the movement here, she put a piece of beef into her mouth. Puffing her cheeks, looking over here. The little girl saw the girl next to Chen Tao, she was slightly startled, and her eyes fell on Chen Tao. The 4 looked at each other. The little girl frowned slightly, and the cheek that was not stuffed with food also bulged. Chen Tao's smile froze on his face. This little girl was Betty. Betty hated Chen Tao's fickleness the most, and now he brought another strange girl to this restaurant and was seen by Betty. It was hard not to be misunderstood.